I loved this movie because I have said it before and I'll say it again. I talk about Marvel, I talk about nerd culture, I talk about Harry Potter, I talk about Star Wars because it is my escape from reality. Diving into a fantasy world is way more fun and exciting and emotionally fulfilling than talking about real world issues. Talking about things that directly affect and impact people is really stressful, and the world is really stressful right now. At best it's boring, and at worst it's scary, and these movies are my escape from reality. And maybe I should make a whole video about that, but I just wanted to say that this movie, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, was the best escape from reality that I've had in a long time. And you can really tell when a movie is done for a paycheck and when a movie is done for the craft by people who are not just doing it for a paycheck. They're still doing it for a paycheck, but like, you know what I mean. They're not just doing it for money. They really are putting their heart and soul into this movie, and I can tell. And that's why I make these videos, because in my little insignificant way, I'm a part of that. I'm Brennan Beckwith, and this is my review of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Like I said, I loved this movie, and I feel like the majority of this video is just gonna be me reiterating how much I liked this movie. I am going to see this movie again. Don't even wait for the end for me to tell you that. But I'm still going to have my segments that I normally do and all of these timestamps, so you can skip around to whatever part of the review you want to see. Other than that, let's just get started with the spoiler-free review.
News: Spider-Man saves the day again.
Spider-Man. This guy swings in once a day, zip, zap, zop, Nancy. Accountability.
Speed up, I know.
I think the majority of what I already said is a spoiler-free review. It's a good movie. It is so beautiful. It's a good movie. Go in with high expectations. It's pretty great. It lives up to the hype. I was very hesitant because I really didn't want to be disappointed, but like, I was hyped for this movie and I was not disappointed. So please be hyped for this movie. It is truly a love letter to the comic books. It is a love letter to Spider-Man, and it is a love letter to Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. It is so, so cool. It was like watching a live action comic book. It was so, so cool, and I cannot get over how cool the animation style was and how cool this movie was. Almost everything seemed to make good sense. It looks like they put a lot of time and effort and heart into this movie, and it was amazing, and I loved it. And it is the reason that I talk about this kind of stuff, because it's just so fun and such a good escape from reality. And I can't wait to see more. If they do more, they're definitely going to do more of these movies, but I would love, I can't wait. I can't wait to go see it again. And that's how excited I am about this movie. Now let's talk about some spoilers. If you don't want this movie to be spoiled, don't watch the rest of this video. I guess you can skip to my final ranking, because I'll probably stop spoiling at that point.
Say, weird things happen to me a lot, but this was real weird.
Okay, so let's get into specifically my favorite things about this movie. First and foremost, the Stan Lee cameo was just beautiful. I'm sure the reason that I loved it so much was because it is the first Stan Lee cameo that we are seeing after his death. They couldn't have planned it. They couldn't have. They couldn't have known. But his cameo happens right after the city is mourning Peter Parker's death. The whole theater just sighed, and it was just beautiful. This moment was just so beautiful. I will talk about Gwen Stacy in a minute, but I am so excited for her movie. Just gonna put it out there. I think her character rocks. I think Spider-Woman rocks in this movie. So let's talk about Miles' relationships. I want to make a whole video about Spider-Man's relationships in general, because Peter Parker and Miles and Gwen Stacy and all the other Spider people are truly defined by their relationships to other people, by the people in their lives that mean the most to them. And that was a very central part to this movie, is how all of these Spider-Mans not only relate to each other, but relate to the people in their lives. I love the way that they really put Miles' relationships and Spider-Man's relationships as the forefront to this movie. It's really the kicker in this movie, and I think that stays true to Spider-Man from the very beginning, Spider-Man was defined by his relationships with people, his relationships with Uncle Ben, his relationships with Aunt May, and the people around him. And this movie pays homage to that so much, and I think it's something that maybe some other Spider-Man movies in the past haven't gotten right. Let's list all the times I cried in this movie. When alternate universe Peter Parker saw Aunt May or was about to meet Aunt May, that was so emotional for me because, again, like, I understand how deeply Peter Parker loves Aunt May. Even though it was alternate universe, like, maybe that made it even sadder, was that it wasn't his Aunt May, but it was the closest thing he was ever going to come to his Aunt May. Again, seeing her alive again, and just, man, that was so sad. When Miles' dad was talking through the door to Miles, and Miles was like tied up, that was obviously the push that Miles needed, more so than anything Peter B. Parker could have pushed him. Up until that point, Miles' dad kind of was encouraging and wanted his son to succeed, and you could obviously tell that he loved Miles. It just, he never said the right things. He just never said what Miles needed to hear until that very moment when Miles didn't have a way to respond, and all he could do was listen, and that was so beautiful. I didn't cry at the Stan Lee cameo, but I could have. Almost teared up at the little tribute to Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. I thought that was beautiful. I cried. Oh, and then of course I cried when Aaron died. That was heartbreaking as well. Those were the times I cried. Back to your regularly scheduled video. I never thought I would be a fan of older Spider-Man. I don't really read comics, but like, I started reading Spider-Man comics, and I'm just not a fan of older Peter Parker. Even like college age Peter Parker, I'm kind of like over it. I think Peter Parker is best represented as a high schooler, and so I was very hesitant about watching an older Peter Parker. Captain Midnight talked about this in his video about Into the Spider-Verse. Basically, they took a dark turn with older Peter Parker that I wasn't necessarily expecting, and it really paid off and really added a lot more emotion to this character that I previously thought would just be boring and lame, and that like really added a lot of depth to this character and turned out being one of my favorite characters in this movie. Speaking of characters, the character development was really awesome considering they were introducing all new characters. All of these characters are new characters to our universe, and somehow they were good with character development. Somehow, even with all the characters and all the villains and all of the events of this movie, somehow it stayed true to a Miles Morales storyline. I am so happy that they were able to cram all this stuff in a very satisfying way and stayed true to Miles Morales' origin story.
My name is Gwen Stacy. For the last 2 years, I've been the one and only Spider-Gwen.
I don't have a lot of negative things to say about this movie, so I'll try to make it quick, but there was a few nitpicky things. This was definitely the best way that Sony has ever portrayed multiple villains in a Spider-Man movie. I can say that for sure, but it was still too much. It was still a little crowded. I did like the Doc Ock twist, but I wish they had saved that for a second movie perhaps, and just focused on Kingpin and the Prowler. I don't know. It was crowded to begin with, so obviously a lot of villains would have made it more crowded, and it did. Another minor thing that I didn't really understand, something that just didn't make sense in my head, was Gwen Stacy's appearance at Miles' school. It felt like just a very confusing way to get Miles to have a crush on Gwen. Like, that's what it felt like, and it just didn't make very much sense because all of the spider people knew who Miles was as soon as like they met him, so Gwen obviously knew, but then she didn't do anything about it until Peter Parker died. Like, that didn't make any sense. She kind of just like hung out at the school for a second and like let Miles be on his own. She didn't like immediately step in and introduce herself after she saw him walking on a building. Like, I don't know, that didn't make any sense to me. I wish that they had just revealed her the way that they revealed her persona in the Doc Ock chase scene. That would have been totally cool with me. I really didn't need the whole extra hair thing that was, I don't know. Honestly, if I start ranting on unnecessary romantic subplots, we'd be here all day. I'll just say that I didn't really care for the romantic things they were trying to push on Miles and Gwen, because it seemed like this movie sought to break a lot of barriers and stereotypes for superhero movies, but they still fell under the stereotype that if you have a man and a woman who are about the same age in a movie, they have to be love interests, and that was just kind of annoying to me and unnecessary. I think a lot of romantic subplots in movies are unnecessary, so no surprise here. They did keep it to a minimum, but that is pretty darn nitpicky of me.
You're like me. That's impossible.
All right, final ranking. Let's do this. 11 out of 10. I loved this movie. And final thoughts. If you are hesitant about going to see this movie, I don't know why you watched this whole video, but you should go see this movie. It's super, super good. I can't say enough about this movie, so I'm going to talk about it more on my podcast with my friend Sean called This Podcast Was Burdened with Glorious Purpose. We talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but we are going to make a special episode for Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, so stay tuned for that. You can find us on Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcasts now, so it's super exciting. The links are in the description. I will definitely be making more videos about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse very soon, so subscribe. So I also make videos every week. I try to post them on Tuesday, but sometimes they happen earlier and sometimes they happen later. It's a surprise. That's why you need to subscribe so you can be notified when I make a new video. Other than that, I'm Brendan Beckwith. That was my review of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Until next time, make good choices and go watch this movie. It's pretty good. Goodbye.